Imagine you've spent like 2 solid years perfectly mastering how to drive a car. You know the mechanics, you understand the rules of the road, and you feel incredibly confident behind the wheel.
Right.
But there is a catch. You've only ever driven in a massive, completely empty parking lot.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. So the weather in that parking lot
Yeah.
is, like, always clear.
Exactly.
There are no pedestrians,
Yeah.
no unpredictable drivers to bump into, and your instructor is just sitting right next to you, giving you these calm, deliberate instructions with plenty of warning before every single turn.
Yeah, it feels incredibly safe. You understand every variable in that totally controlled environment.
Sure.
But then you take your hard-earned driving skills out into the real world. You try to merge into real traffic.
Which is terrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it feels like you've been teleported out of that safe parking lot and dropped directly onto a chaotic, high-speed, 8-lane highway. Cars are cutting you off, horns are blaring, and the rules you learned seem to have completely vanished. That jarring, terrifying transition is exactly what it feels like when you try to take a new language out of the classroom and you try to actually listen to native speakers in the real world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the transition from the textbook to the street it's where so many learners simply freeze up.
Right.
And they just question whether they have actually learned anything at all over those past 2 years.
And we are tackling that exact feeling of overwhelm today, so welcome to our deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we are deconstructing this massive brick wall that almost everyone hits when learning a new language. Understanding native speakers when they seem to be talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's universal.
It really is. So our mission today is to figure out why native speech sounds so utterly impossible to decode. And more importantly, we want to uncover a specific 4-step protocol to actually train your ear.
Right, getting past the frustration.
Exactly. We are drawing our insights today from a brilliant story-based lesson titled Mastering the Rhythm of Fast English Speakers, and that's from the Easy English podcast.
Yeah, and the approach in this lesson is incredibly practical because it bypasses dry grammar lectures and just uses a narrative to get straight to the core of how our brains process audio.
I love that about it.
We basically follow a case study of a learner named Sara. And Sara is the perfect avatar for the classic language learner's dilemma.
She really represents the frustration we have all felt at some point. I mean, she's put in the work, She possesses a massive vocabulary.
Huge vocabulary.
She understands all these complex grammar structures. If she sits down for a deliberate, slow conversation with a language tutor, she follows along beautifully.
Right, the empty parking lot.
Exactly. But the moment she tries to watch a movie without subtitles, or she overhears a group of native speakers chatting at a cafe, her entire processing system just shuts down.
Yeah, the words just blur into this muddy, continuous stream of sound.
And she has that deeply human reaction where she starts to question her own intelligence. She's asking herself, why can't I understand fast English?
Which is so heartbreaking, but so common.
It is. But I need to pause here and challenge this core premise for a second. Is it really just a matter of speed?
What do you mean?
Well, because if I take a professionally recorded audiobook where the narrator is enunciating perfectly, and I go into the app and crank the speed up to 2x, it is incredibly fast.
Right, yeah.
But my brain can still parse the words. I can still understand the story perfectly fine. So if sheer speed isn't actually the barrier, what is happening to the words in real life that makes them so incomprehensible?
That is the perfect question. And that distinction between speed and clarity is the exact revelation that changes everything for a learner.
Okay.
So the mentor character in our story, James, he introduces a concept that completely flips the script. He points out that fast English is not just fast.
Okay, so what is it then?
Well, Sara didn't learn writing English, right?
Mm-hmm.
She learned clear English. When you speed up an audiobook, you are simply compressing clear English.
Right.
Every single consonant and vowel is still perfectly articulated by the narrator, just in quicker succession.
Oh, I see. So the boundaries between the words are still there.
They are. But in a native conversational environment, people do not speak clear English. They don't just say the same perfectly articulated words faster. They structurally change the words.
Structurally change them.
Yeah. They actively connect words together. They reduce sounds, and they frequently skip whole syllables or chunks of words entirely for the sake of efficiency.
Okay, let's look at the classic example provided in the lesson because this really helped me. A textbook teaches you the formal, perfectly segmented sentence, like, what are you going to do?
Right.
6 distinct words. What are you going to do?
But a native speaker in a casual setting almost never articulates those 6 distinct words.
Yeah.
The sentence morphs entirely. It just compresses into what you gonna do.
What you gonna do? It shrinks from 6 sharp words into 3 blended, messy sounds.
Yeah.
Thinking about that transformation gives me a very specific visual. It's the exact difference between print handwriting and cursive handwriting.
Oh, I like that. Let's explore that visual because it maps perfectly onto what the ear is actually experiencing.
Right, so in print handwriting, every single letter stands alone. There are clear, defined spaces between the letters and obvious boundaries between the words.
Yep.
A printed T and a printed H have these distinct geometric shapes. But in cursive, the letters flow together without any bricks. The physical shapes of the letters actually change to accommodate the connection to the next letter.
Right, they bend and loop.
And when someone is writing in cursive very quickly, some of the letters are barely formed at all. They just become a little bump in the ink.
Yeah, a total scribble.
So native speakers are essentially speaking in audio cursive.
Audio cursive, I love that. Applying the concept of cursive to audio explains the exact root of Sarah's frustration. Her brain is desperately searching the audio stream for printed text.
It wants those clear boundaries.
Exactly. It expects those clear, distinct boundaries between words. But that audio input simply does not exist in a natural conversation. You cannot read cursive if your brain is only trained to recognize print.
Right, you'll just see a page full of meaningless squiggles.
Yeah, and your brain just drops the information because it doesn't recognize the shapes.
It's just noise.
Yes, neuroscientists actually refer to this as prediction error.
Prediction error.
Yeah, your brain anticipates a specific sound, the clear printed textbook word. But when the incoming audio doesn't match that prediction, the brain fails to map it to the vocabulary you already know.
Even if you know the word perfectly.
Exactly. So the learner has to fundamentally shift their focus. They must stop trying to identify individual textbook words and start focusing on the actual sounds.
The rhythm, the connected flow, the audio cursive.
Yes.
Okay, acknowledging that native speakers use audio cursive is a great paradigm shift. But how do you actually force an adult brain to read those audio squiggles?
Well, that's where James comes in.
Right. The lesson outlines a very specific ear training protocol to bridge this gap between clear English and real spoken English.
And it boils down to working with short audio clips, repeating them constantly, slowing the audio down to catch the connections, and most importantly, practicing a technique called shadowing.
Shadowing. Let's define that.
So shadowing is defined as listening to a piece of audio and immediately repeating it out loud. You are trying to perfectly mimic the speaker's rhythm, their intonation, and all those messy connections.
Okay.
Focusing on sounds, not just words, is the golden rule for this step.
I have to push back on this shadowing requirement, though.
Cool.
Yeah, it just sounds exhausting. Why is immediate out loud repetition necessary? If the goal is simply to train my ear to hear better, why can't I just put on an English podcast while I'm, I don't know, doing the dishes or folding laundry?
The laundry method.
Right. Doesn't bathing my brain in the language through passive listening accomplish the same thing over time?
Well, passive exposure is great for getting a general feel for the melody of a language, sure. But it falls completely short when you are trying to crack the code of audio cursive.
Really?
Yeah. When you passively listen to a podcast while folding laundry, the messy, connected sounds just wash right over you. Your brain doesn't have a compelling, urgent reason to decode the reductions and the skipped syllables.
It treats it as background noise.
Exactly.
Because there's no consequence to not understanding it.
And no active engagement. Active repetition like shadowing out loud forces a completely different cognitive and physical process.
Physical process.
Yeah, to physically reproduce the reduced connected sound of what you're going to do, your brain have to actively map that exact messy rhythm. You are literally engaging your motor cortex.
Wow.
You have to move your mouth, your tongue, and your vocal cords in unfamiliar ways.
Wait, hold on. Engaging the motor cortex sounds intensely biological. What is actually happening in my brain when I sit in my living room and just repeat what you're going to do out loud?
Well, your brain is building muscle memory. When you force your physical articulators, your tongue, your lips, your jaw, to mimic the blurry connections of native speech, your motor cortex sends feedback directly to your auditory cortex.
Seriously?
Yes, you are physically teaching your brain how that specific sound is produced. This physical mapping dramatically reinforces your auditory cortex's ability to recognize that same sound pattern the next time it hears it.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. You aren't just sitting in the audience letting the music play. You are forcing yourself to pick up an instrument, and play along with the band.
You build the physical muscle memory of the sound, which in turn trains the ear to catch it. That is fascinating.
It really is.
But taking this intense shadowing protocol and applying it to real life sounds daunting. How does a learner actually execute this without getting completely overwhelmed and just, quitting by day 3?
Yeah, burnout is real.
Yeah.
But we can look at Sarah's exact 3-phase progression to see how to remove the training wheels gradually. This isn't about jumping straight onto the highway. It is about a controlled escalation of difficulty.
Let's break down phase 1 then. Sara starts her practice using a resource called Short Stories in English for Beginners, specifically the Touch Yourself version. And her method here is to listen to the audio while reading the text at the exact same time. Then she pauses and repeats each sentence slowly and carefully.
Right.
But I see a potential flaw here. Isn't reading while listening basically cheating?
Cheating. How so?
Well, if the entire goal of this exercise is ear training, having the text right in front of your eyes seems to defeat the purpose. Your brain is going to take the path of least resistance and just rely on reading the print rather than decoding the audio cursive.
I hear you. Labeling it as cheating is actually a very common misconception among learners.
Oh, really?
Yeah. What is actually happening in phase 1 is calibration. Think of the visual text as a necessary anchor.
An anchor, okay.
See, Sarah's brain currently only knows the clear textbook words. When she hears the messy audio cursive, her brain experiences that prediction error we discussed, and it panics.
Right, the squiggles.
But by looking at the perfectly spelled printed text, while simultaneously hearing the messy spoken sound, she is building a neurological bridge.
Oh, so she is actively teaching her brain, hey, this messy sound hitting my eardrum is actually this specific, clearly printed word I already know.
Exactly. She is pairing the known visual with the unknown audio. The visual cortex is literally helping the auditory cortex decode the signal.
That's brilliant.
She is calibrating her ear to the reality of the spoken word in a safe environment. And once that initial neurological link is stabilized, she's ready to remove the visual crutch and introduce some friction.
Which brings us to phase 2.
Phase 2.
So in phase 2, Sara moves to a new resource. Learn English through stories. 16 stories to improve your English grammar and English vocabulary.
Long title, but great resource.
Very long title. But here, she takes the training wheels off entirely. She listens without reading.
And removing the visual anchor is where the real test begins. It is highly frustrating at first.
Which makes total sense, you've taken away the safety net. When Sara hits play on that audio without the text, she feels exactly what you feel when you accidentally turn off the subtitles on Netflix.
Sheer panic.
Sheer panic. The words start blurring together again. But instead of quitting, she pushes through the friction. She uses the shadowing protocol.
Right.
She listens to the exact same story over and over again, repeating the sounds out loud until she starts to map them without the visual aid.
It takes discipline. But once she conquers that frustration, she graduates to phase 3.
And phase 3 incorporates a resource called Effortless English. Learn to speak English like a native.
Yeah. And the goal here shifts from intensive decoding to sheer repetition. She is learning to sort of surrender to the rhythm and the natural sound of the language.
She listens repeatedly, shadows naturally, and allows the rhythm of the language to take over. This is the stage where the patterns start to lock in, right? She realizes the words are naturally connected, the harsher consonant sounds are softer. The lesson describes this breakthrough beautifully, actually. It says that English begins to feel more like music.
And reaching that musical stage is the ultimate payoff. But we do need to be very clear about the reality of the timeline here.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is not a weekend life hack.
No, it is a workout routine for your brain. Just like going to the gym, your muscles are going to ache before they grow.
Perfect analogy.
The timeline is slow, and some days are incredibly demoralizing. But Sara doesn't stop. She listens again and again. And we see that after 2 weeks of this daily shadowing protocol, a tangible shift occurs.
2 weeks is the magic number.
She watches a short video in English, and she actually understands more. She doesn't catch every single word, but the wall of sound is starting to break apart into recognizable chunks.
Yeah, 2 weeks is generally the threshold where the brain starts to trust the new audio mapping it has been forced to do.
Okay.
The motor cortex and auditory cortex have communicated enough times to establish new neural pathways.
And then, jumping forward to the 1-month mark, Sara notices a profound transformation. Fast English doesn't feel like an impossible assault on her senses anymore.
Her ears are trained.
Her ears are trained. Her brain is automatically recognizing those messy, connected sounds without requiring her to consciously translate them or visualize the printed text.
It's automatic. And the most important byproduct of this whole process is the confidence she gains.
Right.
There is this great moment where someone speaks to her quickly in a real, unscripted conversation. And she doesn't freeze.
She doesn't panic.
She just listens, and she understands. She smiles because she finally realizes the ultimate truth of her entire struggle.
Which is?
Her previous inability to understand native speakers was never a reflection of her intelligence. It was only ever a matter of training her ear to hear the cursive.
That is such a relieving realization. And, the implications of that realization extend far beyond just learning English.
Oh, definitely.
I want you, listening to this deep dive right now, to think about the hurdles you are currently facing in your own life.
Yeah, think about it.
Maybe you are learning a new language, or maybe you are trying to process incredibly dense new skills at your job, or trying to wrap your head around a complex new software system.
Anything new and overwhelming.
Exactly. When you hit that wall, when everything feels too fast, too chaotic, and completely incomprehensible.
Yeah.
Do you get frustrated because you assume you lack the underlying intelligence to grasp it? Or is it simply because your processing center hasn't mapped the rhythm of this new environment yet?
It's almost always the latter. But assuming a lack of intelligence is the easiest, most defeating conclusion to jump to.
It's a trap.
It is. But it is almost always a mapping issue. The brain just needs the right kind of exposure and active repetition to build the bridge.
Yeah.
The final piece of advice the mentor, James, leaves us with is profound in its simplicity.
Yeah.
You don't need to be faster to understand fast speech. You just need to listen more and listen better.
Listen better. So what does listening better actually look like in practice? Let's do a quick recap of the mechanics we've unpacked today. The foundational takeaway is that fast native speech isn't just a sped up version of textbook language. It is fundamentally changed. It is connected, reduced, and blended into audio cursive.
And you cannot conquer audio cursive by simply memorizing more vocabulary words from a printed page. You conquer it by fundamentally changing how you practice.
Right. You have to actively calibrate your brain. You implement the 4-step protocol. You start with short clips so you don't overload your cognitive capacity.
It's a demanded tool.
You slow those clips down to hear the hidden connections. You use text as a visual anchor in the beginning to build the neurological bridge between the known word and the messy sound.
That crucial calibration phase.
And above all else, you practice shadowing. You physically repeat the sounds out loud, engaging your motor cortex to force your brain to map the messy reality of the rhythm.
Yeah.
You accept the intense frustration of the first few weeks, knowing that the music of the language is waiting for you on the other side of that friction.
It requires a massive shift in mindset from passively acquiring information to actively training a physical and neurological reflex.
It's active work. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a slightly provocative thought experiment to mull over on your own.
Oh, love these.
We've spent our time today analyzing how native speakers naturally erode, blend, and shorten their words for the sake of speaking efficiently.
Right.
Taking a clear sentence like, what are you going to do? And eroding it down to, what you gonna do? It makes me wonder about the long-term trajectory of spoken language itself.
Well, language is a living thing, right? It is in a state of constant evolution.
Exactly. So think about this. What will spoken English actually sound like in 200 years? If this constant erosion and blending for the sake of speed and rhythm continues generation after generation, will today's fast, messy audio cursive eventually be written down and formalized?
Like actually put in the dictionaries.
Yeah. Well, what you're going to do literally become the formal, clear, textbook English of tomorrow.
That is a wild thought.
And if today's messy shortcuts become tomorrow's formal rules, what on earth will native speakers 2 centuries from now sound like when they speak quickly?
I can't even imagine.
Will future language learners have to deal with an entirely new, even more compressed set of confusing audio shortcuts that we can't even conceive of today?
The irony is that the clearer we try to write things down and formalize them in textbooks, the more we inherently want to blur them together when we actually speak. It's just human nature.
It really is. So the next time you find yourself suddenly forced to merge from that safe, perfectly controlled empty parking lot onto the chaotic, high-speed highway of native speech,
Just take a deep breath.
take a deep breath. Don't panic. You aren't a bad driver, and you certainly aren't lacking intelligence. You just need to turn on the radio, actively engage with the messy rhythm of the traffic, and let your ear catch the music.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep practicing, and we will catch you next time.